This is from Politico. Dems freak out over Biden's debate performance. Biden is toast, one prominent operative texted. Time for an open convention.
All Joe Biden needed to do was deliver a repeat performance of his State of the Union address. Instead, he stammered, he stumbled, and with fewer than 5 months to November, he played straight into Democrats' worst fears, that he's fumbling away the election to Donald Trump. The alarm bells for Democrats started ringing the second Biden started speaking in a haltingly hoarse voice. Minutes into the debate, he struggled to mount an effective defense of the economy on his watch and flood the description of key health initiatives he's made central to his re-election bid, saying we finally beat Medicare, and incoherently stating how much his administration lowered the price of insulin. He talked himself into a corner on Afghanistan, bringing up his administration's botched withdrawal unprompted. He repeatedly mixed up billion and million, and he found himself stuck for long stretches of the 90-minute debate playing defense. And when he wasn't speaking, he stood frozen behind his podium, mouth agape, his eyes wide and unblinking for long stretches of time. Biden is toast, calling it now, an attorney and Democratic activist from New Hampshire who co-chaired former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley's 2016 presidential campaign in the state. In text messages with Politico, Democrats expressed confusion and concern as they watched the first minutes of the event. One former Biden White House campaign aide called it terrible, adding that they had to ask themselves over and over, what did he just say? This is crazy. Politico spoke to about a dozen Democrats, some of whom were granted anonymity to discuss Biden's performance. Biden's team was quick to defend the president's performance. First, they said he had a cold, and he was negative for COVID. Then they insisted Trump was hurting himself by insulting Biden's presidential record. Biden did grow stronger throughout the night, at one point seizing on Trump's reported dismissal of fallen soldiers as suckers and losers, to skewer the former president as a real sucker and loser. At others, he hammered Trump's criminal conviction in New York. The only person on the stage who's a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now, Biden said. But first impressions matter, particularly to voters just tuning into the election and who were more likely to watch the first debate than the second that's scheduled for September. And instead of setting the tone for the next phase of the presidential campaign, Biden's shaky performance reignited fears among Democrats that the octogenarian, whose mental acuity and physical fitness have stood as voters' chief concerns about returning him to the White House, might not even be able to carry the party through to November. Time for an open convention, one prominent operative texted. Biden's team had tried to engineer the debate in his favor, pushing for it to be early and without an audience, and the president agreed to hold the event in part to calm Democratic nerves over whether he could win in November. Already, some Democrats were openly saying that Biden should end his campaign. One major Democratic donor and Biden supporter said simply, Biden needs to drop out, no question about it. Biden struggled at times to articulate strong arguments on some of his campaign's biggest selling points, bungling his healthcare record and stumbling through a response on his support for abortion rights. That's weird, his healthcare record, like how he promised us a public option and never did it, and a response on his support for abortion rights. You mean that he didn't codify Roe v. Wade, and he's talking about doing it now, even though he's the president right now? I support Roe v. Wade. You have 3 trimesters. First time is between a woman and a doctor. Second time is between a doctor and an extreme situation. Third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state, he said. Trump tripped too. He called former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's daughter a documentary filmmaker, a Philly maker. He accused Democrats of wanting to take the life of a child after birth. He inflated the country's economic strength under his presidency.
I really did like his after birth scenario.
Yeah, just straight up infanticide. His country's economic strength under his presidency.
All the scholars agree. It was the best. Oh my god, he did that so many times.
I have the best economy. I was the best president.
And you were the worst of all time.
Biden is a bad president. He's the worst president. Just read the fucking transcript of this. He reiterated his defense of the January 6th insurrectionists, launching into a lengthy diatribe against the convictions of hundreds of Trump supporters who stormed the Capitol in an effort to overturn the 2020 election, and asked repeatedly if he would accept the results of the election no matter the winner. Trump refused to give a straight answer, eventually specifying that he'd only do so if the election is fair and free.
Correction. He determines it's fair.
He's already said if he doesn't win, it's rigged. So.
Yeah, well. January 6th time too.
But Trump largely did what Republicans had begged him to do: show some restraint while also laying bare Biden's weaknesses. The former president, who delights in calling Biden sleepy and crooked at every turn, waited a full 20 minutes to draw attention to the Democrats' initially shaky performance. "I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence," Trump said, after Biden stuttered through an answer to a question about immigration. "I don't think he knows what he just said either." And in a relatively staid debate, it was Biden who fell short of even the lowest expectations. After the debate, Cullen said, "Anyone who has watched a parent grow old, frail, and foggy recognizes what they are seeing and knows it only gets worse."
This is from the New York Times. A dark day for Democrats. The combination of President Biden's debate performance and adverse Supreme Court rulings left Democrats reeling in despair, with elections not far off.
Democrats confronted a nightmare scenario on Friday as they surveyed the wreckage of major political, policy, and legal disasters piled atop one another, with elections for control of the White House and Congress less than 5 months away. Even as they reeled from President Biden's poor performance on Thursday night in a make-or-break debate with former President Donald J. Trump, Democrats were slammed anew Friday by the Supreme Court. In one far-reaching ruling, the court undercut the government's long-standing power to regulate health care, public safety, and the environment, a core tenet of the Democratic orthodoxy. In another, the justices handed down a decision that could make it more difficult to prosecute those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, 2021, and potentially Mr. Trump himself for the roles in the violent insurrection. And I think it was something to do with presidential immunity. But I'm really worried about this one, the standing power to regulate healthcare and stuff. Does that mean that Medicare and Medicaid are now unconstitutional? Or is the EPA unconstitutional now?
Well, if they no longer have the power to regulate healthcare, public safety, does that mean that there's no longer an opioid crisis and doctors and pharmacies are no longer going to be contractually obligated when somebody ODs?
Are we defunding the police?
That is safety. That is public safety. Yeah, I don't like the regulation on the medicine, because that can also open up being like no FDA regulation. So you can take a vitamin which is not regulated by the FDA, which means they don't have to list everything that they actually put in it on the bottle. With the FDA approved medications, you have to list every single ingredient. So if people are allergic, have any kind of adverse reactions, they can narrow it down specifically, but like nonetheless, does that mean they're not going to regulate any of that now? Is there no longer going to be refill too soon on controlled substances? Is there no longer going to be like state mandated controlled substance checking internet programs? I'm not sure what they're called everywhere.
They get rid of the whole truck scheduling system if you want to get the federal government out of public safety.
Which also means that you just took all the C1s and made them completely legal? I think we need some more specifications from those fucking idiots.
Yeah.
But remember, these are also some of the dumbasses that thought you could take a fallopian tube pregnancy and reimplant it into the uterus. Just remember how stupid these fucking people are.
It was a day that encapsulated the party's worst fears about the coming elections and the rightward tilt of the Supreme Court. And it drove home how Republicans and Mr. Trump are within reach of victory in November, putting them in a position to achieve a host of policy objectives vehemently opposed by Democrats, even with a presumptive nominee who is a convicted felon, and a party that has been in deep disarray and shown little ability to govern. "It is a bad day for democracy and a threatening day for the rule of law," said Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat of Connecticut and senior member of the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Biden's halting performance prompted a frenzy of speculation about whether he should or even could be replaced as the nominee, a possibility that many leading Democrats dismissed. But the Supreme Court rulings hit just as hard, underscoring the stakes of the coming election and how the impact of Mr. Trump's first term in office is still being felt profoundly. The decisions struck at the heart of Democrats' view of government, one where those who turn to violence to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power should be punished, and one where federal agencies must have the power to interpret federal law and protect the public from corporate misbehavior. Adding insult to injury, the rulings came at a time when Democrats firmly believe the court has been compromised because of the ties of some conservative justices to billionaire businessmen, as well as their tacit support of the January 6th movement. As far as Democrats are concerned, That bias was exposed by the flying of a flag sympathetic to January 6 rioters at the Virginia home of Justice Samuel A. Alito Jr. Both Justice Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, whose wife Virginia was involved in efforts to overturn the 2020 election, refused to recuse themselves from the case. Despite the ground seemingly shifting beneath them, Democrats saw one potential benefit: the possibility that voters worried about empowered Republicans in the direction of the Supreme Court could be motivated to vote for Mr. Biden, particularly with the prospect that the next president will have new vacancies to fill on the court. If people are really paying attention here, said Mr. Blumenthal, alarm bells should be going off at kitchen tables around the country.